So we're looking at communities here, and there are some key terms again that we need to be clear about. We need to know what an ecosystem is. We need to know what a community is. We need to know what a habitat is. And we also need to be able to describe a stable community. And the description of a stable community is just here. So, as usual, you have your Google Doc to make your notes on as we proceed here. So make sure you're answering those questions and carrying out the activities in this presentation as we work our way through. So to start with, just for 10 minutes, 3 things for you to do. 1, put these into a food chain: caterpillar, leaf, snake and lizard. 2, name 5 factors that organisms compete for. And 3, using the correct terms, explain how light provides energy for all living things. So 10 minutes, pause the video, and then when you've done it within those 10 minutes, start the video again. So the food chain: the snake eats the lizard, which eats the caterpillar, which eats the leaf. So leaf, caterpillar, lizard, snake. Factors that organisms compete for: food, water, light, a mate, air or oxygen, space. And then how light energy comes to be the source of pretty much all the energy on Earth. Well, light is absorbed by the chlorophyll in plants, and plants use that to photosynthesize with carbon dioxide to produce glucose, and the glucose then is used by herbivores as food. Thereafter, the carnivores will eat the herbivores, and so everything derives their energy from the sun. So the things we're trying to achieve today: knowing and using those terms, describing factors that affect survival of organisms in their habitat, and resources that plants and animals compete for in a given habitat. And if we go back and look at the things that the syllabus says you need, students should be able to, when provided with appropriate information, suggest the factors which organisms are competing for in a given habitat, suggest how organisms are adapted to conditions in which they live. So, for example, animals that live in very cold environments would have small ears, would have a lot of fur. Animals that live in very cold environments might have a very thick layer of fat, like polar bears, for example. So, and also looking at what a stable community is, where all the species' environmental factors are in balance. And that balance is very easy to upset. So, every ecosystem involves the transfer of energy from the sun through a food chain, and it involves the cycling of certain key resources like nitrogen, for example. You can follow the path of nitrogen through an ecosystem, and water would be the same kind of idea. So we have communities, we have ecosystems, and we have habitats. So communities are groups of organisms. Ecosystems are the organisms and the abiotic, the non-living factors that are involved in supporting that community. And the habitat is an area within that ecosystem, a region where organisms live. So, competition then. Here we have a squirrel competing with a lizard for territory or food, perhaps. Here we have plants, trees, grasses, and that sort of thing. We have lions in their habitat. We have a bison in its habitat. What sorts of things do you think they might be competing for? So here, of course, they might be competing for light. They might be competing for water. Here, the lion and the bison would be competing for mates, not with each other, of course, but they'd be competing with food, creating for food with other lions, with other bison, with other herbivores, with other carnivores. They'd be competing for mates, of course. This lion would be competing with other male lions for the attention of the lionesses. Likewise with the bison. And of course, the fastest, strongest, most powerful, most aggressive, biggest are the more likely to win in these competitions. Then you have deer. So this deer is competing with other stags for the attention of the female deers. And the deepest and loudest of the stags is more likely to successfully breed. So this is competition with other stags. Interdependence, another key term, and this is where two or more things depend on each other. So, for example, the pollinator here gets nectar, which they need, but in doing that, they move pollen from plant to plant. So the plant depends on in this case, the bee, and the bee depends on the plant. So they are interdependent. So another example of interdependence, a really important one here actually, perhaps a surprising one, sea otters and kelp forests. It's a very short video, it's about 4 minutes.
The kelp forests of the North Pacific are one of the richest marine habitats on Earth. These great undersea jungles feed us, protect us, and even influence our climate. Yet one small animal shapes the destiny of this entire web of life. In this film, we explore how sea otters help sustain one of the life-giving wild places of our world.
When you go diving, most of the time you look down. When you're in a kelp forest and you're diving, you look up, you look around you. It's a three-dimensional structure and you're in the middle of it.
It really is just like flying through a forest on land. Sometimes you swim through whole schools of fish. And of course, if you're lucky, you will see sea otters. They're often busy down below you, ferreting around in the undergrowth, and they just look magic. They go to sleep in the kelp forest, and they literally wrap themselves in these long strands of kelp, so they don't drift away.
Kelp forests support a wealth of life, and provide us with food and protection too.
Kelp forests provide this amazing habitat for fish that we need for food.
They actually defend the coastlines against storms and cyclones, which are increasing in intensity as the climate changes. But kelp forests are also helping slow down these changes because they absorb carbon.
The rate at which kelp is able to draw carbon dioxide out of the environment is very high. It's as high as any ecosystem on Earth.
But in some places, these valuable kelp carbon stores are disappearing, mown down by a hungry army.
Every rock, every pebble, a sea urchin just grazes every little plant on it. In places where you have lots of sea urchins, you just don't have kelp forests. The one thing that keeps sea urchins in check are sea otters.
Sea otters hunt out and devour sea urchins, allowing kelp forests to thrive. A healthy sea otter population means healthy kelp forests, and all the benefits that go with them.
So in fact, the sea otter is helping to ensure that kelp forests store as much carbon as they can. If you calculate how much that means in terms of additional carbon storage, then that service is worth $200 to $400 million per annum.
Dealing with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is a huge challenge for the planet. We think that we can solve it by just planting more plants. But it turns out that animals, in this case sea otters, play this crucial role in keeping forests growing.
Guardians of the undersea forests that help stabilize our climate. Sea otters, part of the intricate web of relationships that is the power of nature.
So, surprising, perhaps, certainly surprising to me, the impact the sea otters have. The way that they maintain the kelp forest, which means that the coastline is protected, which means that carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere and stored in the kelp, which gives us the environment, the habitat, I should say, for the fish which we catch and eat. Hugely important to us. And of course, the kelp forest is at risk from sea urchins. If the sea otter's population falls, the kelp forest is diminished by the sea urchins, so the fish aren't there so much. There's more CO2 in the atmosphere, the coasts are not as well protected. So you see what I mean about that delicate balance. If we reduce the sea otter population by pollution, by predation, by hunting, if global warming makes the sea a less attractive place, a less habitable place for the sea otters, so the population falls, then quite serious consequences can flow from that, just because one species has been reduced. Equally, if one species is introduced to an environment where it has no natural predators, for example, like rabbits into Australia, then there can be a real problem. They can seriously undermine that ecosystem. So, three definitions, three really important key terms here. You can see how the habitat, being where a community lives, and an ecosystem being the combination of the community and all those habitats. You see how it all fits together. So your ecosystem is your community of animals and plants and microorganisms and their habitat. The community are those living organisms that are living in this pond, for example. So, stable communities, what I was talking about earlier. If you have a stable community, then the plants, animals, resources are all in balance. But you can upset that balance very easily by changes in those biotic or abiotic factors. So, finally then we have some questions here. 3 questions. 16 marks, 16 minutes, and 5 minutes then to review those answers.